Hello and welcome to the next episode of Untapped Gold Mines. My name is CJ Depperdine, and you can find all of the episodes on untappedgoldmines.com, as well as a search on YouTube for untappedgoldmines.com or on Spotify or iTunes, again, under untappedgoldmines.com. And today I am so incredibly grateful. I'm always grateful to have guests on the show, but I have to say, I'm so grateful to you, Lorie, for coming back on the show, because you and I recorded a show episode a few weeks ago that did not convert. And I made the grave error. So for those of you who are trying to release a podcast or do video webinar recordings using Zoom, I highly recommend not making the grave error that I did, which was hitting the button to record to my computer, because something happened in translation and it didn't convert. So I'm patiently waiting for Zoom to convert that. But Lorie is so kind enough, thank you again, to come back and share her wisdom with us today. And we're hoping we enrich the conversation for all of you listening and give you more to think about, because Lorie's a plethora of just brilliance and love and light around all things people related. And everybody that I know that knows you is like, oh my God, I love Lorie so much. She's so wonderful. And I have to say, this is having that conversation with you that I last had, definitely one of my best conversations in terms of just really tapping into like that internal drive that drives us, because there's a lot that I talk about on the show that's about, external factors, moving pieces on the chessboard and working within teams and distributed leadership and complexity and all of that. And it's wonderful. It's fantastic. But we have to remember that we're whole beings. And so you and I really got into that whole being concept and really brought that into the leadership and into organizations and teams and individuals. So for those of you who do not know Lorie, I'm going to read out her bio again. Lorie, can you just state your name and your last name so I don't butcher your last name? Because I feel like I did butcher it last time.
Oh, it's okay. It's a hard last name. I would butcher it too. So it's Lorie Corcuera. The second C is like a Q. Corcuera.
Okay. Perfect. Okay, so I don't think I did butcher it, because I've known you for a long time and I think I did get it right.
You did.
But as I read it, I was like, did I actually get it right? Anyways, okay, so Lorie is the co-founder and CEO at Spark Creations and Company, Inc., a training and development organization that inspires people and companies to create meaningful cultures and workplaces. Over the past 20 years, Lorie has cultivated her people and culture development, community relations, and leadership coaching experience as both a strategic and progressive senior human resources leader in technology, interactive entertainment, retail, hospitality, manufacturing, professional services, and nonprofit spaces. Lorie is passionate about elevating the life experience at work and cultivating a community that is igniting and enriching our human spirit. Lorie has been featured as a speaker for Disrupt HR, HR Tech Human Capital Symposium, CPHR Victoria Symposium, CPHR BC and Yukon Annual Conference, HR Professionals Association Annual Conference, Canadian Auto Association Customer Experience Conference, and Women in Tech Regatta. I think you've done it all, but I
like to talk.
Yeah, and we like to listen to you, so it's great. You've also published articles for magazines, Inc., People Talk Magazine, and BC Business. Lorie is a certified professional coactive coach, so we share our love for coaching and the incredible value that comes out of coaching with the Coaches Training Institute, or CTI. Is an active mentor for Futurepreneur Canada, Dress for Success Vancouver, HR Tech Group, and Forum for Women Entrepreneurs, and co-founder of the Social Enterprise Foundation. To learn more, please do visit sparkcreationsinc.com, and I will share links to this and everything else we talk about that's relevant to kind of link out to on the page on untappedgoldmines.com, where Lorie is featured. Okay, awesome. Yay. You're amazing. You're wonderful. Let me just start again by asking, very briefly, what is it that drives you and keeps you in this field?
Wow. Big question on a Saturday.
Right?
Afternoon is when we're recording this, which I wouldn't trade it for the world. I'm so happy that we had a chance to connect again. And CJ, if we could have like multiple conversations every time we connect, it would be an honor. So thanks again for the feature. So what's coming up for me in terms of like what drives me, I think about my life purpose, which is to live well and love completely, which for me, when you think about people who like, there's lots of reasons why we say wow, right? Someone will go out of their comfort zone or do something that scares them, or that we're like, we can't believe she did that type of thing. And so for me, that's about creating wow experiences, but not just for myself, but like for both of us. Like my intention would be to create a wow experience again for a second time through this conversation. And then the love completely is a reminder for both of us to honor ourselves in this moment, to know that we're good just the way whatever happens, especially if we have to do it a third time. And then that from that place of love, self-love, then we can share more of that with others and really create a meaningful experience. So that's my intention, also what drives me and my purpose.
I love that. And I love that you're so grounded and rooted in love. I know when we first reconnected after many years, because you and I have history like dating back to our teenage days.
Yes.
When we first reconnected, we spoke about how this concept of love in an organizational space is something that we like have to sell. It's not something that, you know, many leaders really lean into and embrace or seek out. Yet, wow, are we ever in a place right now in the world where we need love more than anything else on the planet? We need to love ourselves. We need to love our people. We need to love our organizations. We need to love, you know, what could be in the future. And I think it's just so timely. And I really hope that when people hear this, when leaders, you know, leading huge organizations or even small organizations hear this, what they take away is that acceptance that yes, it is time, and yes, it is okay and quite necessary for us to embrace love of self and others. So let's talk about what that looks like for you when you support organizations. Because I don't think we actually spoke about this last time. So when you go in and help an organization tap into some of these things that you bring forward and bring out of them, what does that look like?
Well, just before our call today, CJ created this wonderful, or wrote this wonderful article about feedback and just how to reframe that. And there was this piece at the very end about vulnerability that really spoke to me. And of course, I feel that that's connected to this whole conversation about love. The reason why it's tricky or people feel uncomfortable with it is the same reason why we feel uncomfortable being vulnerable. There's something that's about you know, something innate in us about, and when we also relate love, it's usually something more personal, family, you know, something that we are not used to bringing or even saying the word in the workplace. So when people ask me, what does that even look like? I always think, okay, tell me the ideal kind of experience you want to create for your people. And people will say, oh, well, and they actually use the word. They go, oh, well, I want my team to love their jobs. I want them to love their company. I want, you know, I said, what about your customers? I want them to love our products and our services. So they're already don't even realize they're saying love. And really what they're sharing is that feeling that they want to have and the impact that they want to have. So then I dig a little bit deeper and I said, well, how do you want your people to feel then? I want them to feel supported. I want them to feel they can just come up with ideas and you know, be innovative and creative. I want them to bring their best selves to work so that they can be most effective. So that's really what love is, because the opposite of that would be fear. Right? Fear-based cultures where there's a lot of ego, holding back of information, maybe some misalignments, maybe conflict, and maybe lack of trust. And so anything that's sort of the opposite of that, I would say is more of the positive, fulfilling, loving experience in the workplace.
Oh, I love it. And so I think you and I both agree that a huge part of that is creating that psychological safety. And that's not something that you like build a course on, as you and I know, and say, here's what psychological safety looks like in the workplace and go do it. It's not that simple, because it's more than just a one-off, I've learned my lesson and I'm going to go take that away. So how do we take, or how do you take a leadership team through that experience of creating an ongoing connection to those values and to those desires of what it feels like to love your job and what it feels like to love the products as a customer? Like, how does psychological safety tie into any of that?
Yeah. So some of the work that we do around psychological safety or building trust or even learning more about your values, it all comes to creating a place where people feel they belong, because
Right.
it's innate in all human beings to feel seen, heard, and cared for, right? Or to feel love, or to experience that, or to even be able to give love. It's just part of being human. I always say the saying is, to be human is to love, and to love is to be human. And so when you think about that at the very core, that we all want to be heard and cared for or belong, then we need to take the time to understand what that even means for each individual. So because like your feedback article, feedback is taken differently, or like the purpose of it will be different for everyone. Someone will want to do it for like, just give me the straight facts so I can like improve my skills, or maybe there's some other desire to fulfill, to even be wanted or to be seen. So you kind of have to dig a little bit deeper. It's the same thing with belonging. What does it mean for you to feel like you belong, and what does belonging mean to you? And when we start to listen carefully and really listen to the words, we will start to understand what they value most in life. And then it's just a continuation of uncovering, because we're so unique and complex as individuals. What you see in the very front of it is just kind of the first layer. You need to uncover, and sorry, not uncover, but peel off the layers to really get to the essence of the individual. And once you get there, and then you honor and acknowledge that, that's when psychological safety, all of those things start to really flourish.
Right. So this is going to be a tough question, and something we have not talked about yet.
Okay.
Something you just kind of inspired
Mm-hmm.
within me. And that is, how do we create the comfort in that for people, including leaders? Because I find that when I work with leaders, and I've worked with a ton of leaders from C-suite down, many of them feel that they have to put on like this face of
Yeah.
like, I'm strong and I have all my shit together and I have all the answers, and I'm going to guide this team, and I'm going to direct this team, and I'm going to do all these things. And yes, I'm going to empower them to do all of that, but I'm not going to talk about my feelings along the way. I'm not going to admit my weaknesses along the way.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not going to go there because it's a sign of weakness.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
We know that leading by example is one of the best ways to lead.
Mm-hmm.
So let's pretend for a moment we've got a group of leaders who just don't want to go there. They don't want to tap into that vulnerability. They don't want to show signs of weakness. They don't want to show that they're human. And then we have a group of people that, report to these leaders, and they see it. And as a result, they kind of feel it too. And if they had it innately in them that they weren't going to be vulnerable and, admit weaknesses or failures or anything like that, then they probably also won't engage in that way.
Mm-hmm.
How do we open that up? What are the first steps in opening that up so that leaders and their reports really see that this is something we need to do without the fear of, if I do it, they're going to look poorly upon me, or if I do it, it's going to change the way that our relationship is. If I do it, it's going to mean that, I'm bringing more of my personal self to work than I want to, or that I'm comfortable then. How do we create the first steps to say that's something that we want and that's something we need? I mean, we know Brene Brown, one of our favorite leaders, in this area, is really, really strong at hitting home the importance of this. But what are the steps? What do we do?
Well, if we're not Brene Brown and we're not
Right?
a researcher, and she's had the time to, like, for over 20 years, interview so many people and gather qualitative research. So she's got the data. So I would definitely look into that if you want the data. But let's just say you want to just kind of uncover this for yourself in a more practical way. I'm gonna ask you a question. Like, I think we kind of did this last time, CJ.
We did.
What, tell me, can you describe to me, think of someone, of a leader or someone that's a strong leader or mentor, and describe, the qualities that make them that person that inspires you as a leader.
Oh, it's a great question. And I will answer this. So, because what I love about our true conversation is like the back and forth. So I will answer this because I'm in agreement with you. If we could do this ongoing, I would totally love it. I think there's tons of value. To answer that question, I think the leaders that I've admired the most and have created the most safety are the ones who have sat in a room and said, right out of the gate, I don't have all the answers. I've hired you to help build this organization and bring us forward. I'm asking you today what your thoughts are, what your feelings are. And we're not going to get it right the first time, the second time, the third time. We need to create a safe space where everybody in this room knows that mistakes are lessons we get to learn from, and that they're experiments that we get to analyze and take the best elements from and actually move forward. Those are the types of leaders that I look up to for psychological safety. In addition to that, I would say the leader, and you and I spoke about this last time, the leader that comes to you first and says, do you have any feedback for me? You want to give me any information that would help me be a better leader, or that would help me help you be stronger in your role. I think it's a bit of give and take, because I don't think it's fair for leaders to say, I have all the answers. I know what we're doing. We're going in this direction, and here's feedback for you to make sure that you're moving in that direction. I don't think that that's the answer. And that's part of the reason why my article was written today as well, is because, my leader came to me and said, like, what you do with feedback is incredible. And I've not seen anybody that kind of embraces it the way that you do. But for me, it's an obligation for us to grow. So that's kind of like my long-winded answer.
How did it make you feel to receive that feedback from Leslie?
Oh, I definitely had a moment where I was like, oh, that's so sweet. And then I had a moment where I was like, but it's an obligation. To me, it's an obligation. If I want to grow, and if I want to help other people grow and help lead the charge for talent development and growth and organizational development, to me, it feels like an obligation that I ask for feedback so that I can get what is needed out of the people that I support the most in order to give them what they want.
Right.
But it was kind of, like I said in my article, it kind of hit like, like it should have been like, oh my God, that's amazing. And nobody's ever said that before. And, this is fantastic. I should take this away and celebrate this feedback. And I certainly am. But my way of celebrating it is like paying it forward and saying, hey, this is what my leader was telling me about. And here are the ways that it works for me. Right. And here's how I think we need to rethink feedback in organizations. But it's a huge cultural shift. Okay.
Well, okay, there's a reason why I asked you this question, is because when people are asking how to bring more, how to lead more with love, how to bring more vulnerability, how to create psychological safety, like, how do we actually do those things? I always start with the question of, well, why don't you describe the best leader you've ever worked with?
Right.
And when they describe that person, like you did of Leslie, or just kind of the summary of qualities of great leaders that you worked with, the underlying theme, or the common theme that you shared, was people who had the courage to say, hey, I don't have all the answers. And it was about vulnerability, and it was about bravery and courage. And even when you ask that question to a whole bunch of other people, and they describe whatever that leader or mentor is to them, they're always describing a feeling of how that person made them feel, and the kind of, just the impact that they had on them, as well as whoever else that they were leading. And that's where I think we start with, is that it's always going to be about a feeling. It's always going to be emotion. It's not going to, we don't say, oh, that person was really, good at some technical development thing. I mean, maybe there might be parts of that where we might focus on that, but if anyone talks about someone who was inspirational or a leader that had impact in their life, they'll always focus on how that person made them feel.
Right. And it's a great point, because I think it makes me think about the quote, people will, and I'm going to butcher this one, but people will never remember what you said, but they will remember how that you made them feel.
Yes.
And it's been one of the things that stuck with me as a presenter throughout my entire history, because even though I started out, sadly, in my speaking career with like bullet points to infinity, to make sure that I said all the right things, I was really, really clear, because of that type of quote, that it was important to also get a feeling across. And so whenever I speak on stage, it's about creating that feeling that people get to walk away with. And I've been to many conferences where that feeling doesn't exist. It's kind of like, yeah, you're giving me a whole, list of tactical things, and that's great. But exactly, it's kind of robotic. And we don't want to do that, because at the end of the day, especially now, culture creates businesses. And it's not just the culture that's inside the walls, it's also the culture of how you treat your customers. And it's that feeling that comes across. So I'd like to use this as a segue to get back to asking you questions.
Sure.
I know that within 24 hours of us having this particular conversation, you are expected to be releasing your workplace culture report. So can you tell us a little bit about what's in that? And I'd love to dive into some of the stuff that they're not necessarily going to see in the report, but they really should also be thinking about and taking away. And if we pair these two together, I think it'd be wonderful.
Okay, sounds good. And it's going to connect with everything that we've talked about so far, because,
Awesome.
vulnerability and culture being the strategy, all of that is in the report, and part of the reason why we actually did the report. So 2 years ago, we decided, or we actually looked at all the information that we have around data, around culture, because whenever we do the work around culture, people always want to know, well, what's the return on investment? How do I know this is going to affect my bottom line? I know it makes some people cringe, the people who are really focused on people first, but it's just the reality, because we still need to make a profit. We still need to pay the bills and all of that. At the same time, what you're going to notice from all of different webinars and podcasts, it's the companies that respond to this COVID by focusing on their people that are actually going to survive and thrive, because there's lots of changes and lots of movement. And if we're not considering the feeling that our people are going to have, it's not going to end well. So that's part of the report. So in the report, which launches on Monday, we're going to share why culture matters. We actually came up with 5 whys and some data points so that it can really answer that question of why it's important. Even though you and I already know that. We're going to share the 5 themes, because we interviewed 30 companies from different industries, different sizes of companies, including Microsoft and SAP, some of the bigger companies, as well as companies that you haven't heard before. And then we want to share with you what are the themes, what is top of mind of them, so that this is, even before the COVID, these are some of the things they were already focusing on. I would even times 10 now because of the COVID. Like, these are things that we need to think about. And I'll just share really quickly one of them. Theme number 2 is that culture must be defined and intentional. So companies that thought about that beforehand are having a great way of staying connected and maintaining that culture, because it's clear as to who they are and what they stand for. If you didn't define that, people are kind of a bit lost. Why are we here? Why are we still, what are we doing? How are we going to get through this? And then we're also sharing BC statistics as well as top trends. And the top trend that I want to highlight right now, and maybe we'll kind of talk a little bit about it, is number 2 trend is self-leadership. And it's not on any of the other trends. And we wanted to be bold, and we actually changed this after the COVID. So we were going to launch the report in March, and then we paused because, we just didn't think it was the right time to share the information with everything that was going on.
Right.
We had some time to really think about what is really the important thing that people have to focus on, and self-leadership is one of them. So what do you think about that, self-leadership?
Yeah, it's a great question. And I definitely want to hear from you kind of what comes to mind when you think about self-leadership. Because to me, it's a ton of investment in
Yeah.
self. It's an ongoing commitment to learning and growth of self.
Mm-hmm.
And that can look significantly different for each person. But I think one of the key things for me, and I'll put it back to you by creatively putting it out there,
Yeah.
is the word leadership. Like when we think about self-leadership, I don't know if we're thinking about self-leadership as a CIO, a CTO, a director. It's self-leadership in every level of an organization, or even in our own lives, in our own family. So I'd be
Mm-hmm.
curious to know from you, uh,
Mm-hmm.
what self-leadership really looks like for you, and kind of what came out of that report that we can sink our teeth into.
Mm-hmm. Well, first of all, I agree with you that everyone is a leader, and it's not about
Right.
title or rank. We all have an opportunity, especially during this time, to be a human leader, to be a leader of self. Why that came up and why we decided to add that as one of the themes or one of the trends is because if you think about what's happening every day right now, there's a lot of stress, a lot of overwhelm. If there was already loneliness and isolation, times 10 now. Like everyone's
Yep.
experiencing it. We're all experiencing the pandemic together, but in our own unique way. And
Right.
what's happening when you're under stress, this amount of stress, for some of us, the first time we've ever experienced a pandemic, what happens is that anything that was a challenge before, or a trigger or an issue, things that we're sort of like, we just kind of keep ourselves busy, I can deal with that later. It's all open. It's all
Yep.
out there. So you see the true colors of people. You see how they really respond, because we're just kind of in protective mode, right? Our
Right.
amygdala is completely on, and there's
Yeah.
either fight, flight, or freeze, and we're just kind of responding in more of a reactionary, which is why self-leadership is even more important right now.
Yeah.
How do we show up and take ownership for ourselves as a mom, as a dad, as a teacher, as any type of role? If we're all connected with someone. How do we show up the best way so that we're influencing and putting that energy in our everyday? And that's why we focus on bringing back to the workplace. Yeah, especially if you're like the CEO or founder, all of the leadership, if they're taking ownership for themselves first, and then as a collective, that feeds down to the rest of the organization. Every person that has a leadership title is in a fishbowl right now. We're like, ooh, how is that person going to respond? And why haven't they responded? And what's happening? So that's why it's a big deal. And we're hoping that it inspires people and companies to create programs that now focus on the work that you do, CJ, which is learning more about ourselves, like our values, our emotional intelligence, how we show up, how do we take feedback before we even give feedback, learn about what that means for us first.
Right. Yeah. And there's just, there's so much to this subject.
Mm-hmm.
And I know something that you said earlier in that conversation kind of struck me a little bit. And that is like, we're all in this,
Mm-hmm.
and everything is 10x. So anything that we were feeling before is multiplied now. Um, and I would say the same is true of any leader who felt like they didn't have, you know, the big picture of what was happening with their team, or the vision, or the strategy, or, any of that. Like they're now going, crap. Like when you talk about the fishbowl, I think about that fish that is sort of sitting at the top of the water, looks mildly stunned or paralyzed or perhaps dead, but isn't floating on their back. They're just sitting there. It's quite a visual for me, because I feel like there are some leaders that were put in that position in the fishbowl at the start of this. And I believe you're correct. Like how they show up right now and really invest in leading themselves and share that with people in their organizations and admit that to themselves and are open and vulnerable about it, and create the space for others to come to them who are also in that position of, you know, need around self-leadership and what does it look like to overcome the stuff that I'm faced with right now, the stuff that I'm stunned with right now. I think it's really, really important.
Yeah, I want to add to that, because what you said earlier, and it's just coming back, and I'm sorry I didn't maybe answer the question the first time, but you're like, why do leaders, like, what do we do with the leaders that feel the pressure to put on that armor, or that, you know, I'm tough, I have all the answers, and I'm strong. This is it's not about perfection. Like,
Yeah.
leadership, true leadership isn't about perfection or trying to be something. It's about being you, just
Right.
showing up and being you. But the only way you're going to show up authentically is if you know who you are. So first
Mm,
step one is learning who you are, and then having the courage to slowly say, you know what, here's what's happening for me right now. Here's what, you know, you don't have to go into too much personal details around your
right.
children, but if you have the courage to say, you know what, I'm finding homeschooling hard too. Like, I get it, or I relate to you, or whatever's coming up for you. The more real and authentic, as hard as it is, this is actually the time where that kind of vulnerability, leaders are, is actually, you don't have choice. Just like when we went all on remote, we didn't have a choice. We were going to go remote regardless whether we were ready or not,
Right.
or whether we trust our team or not. Now we just have to trust regardless. But it's the same thing with vulnerability and courage. We just have to lead the way now.
Right. And we have to lean into it. And
Mm-hmm.
I have to acknowledge you for also doing that, because I've seen some of your posts by the waterfront, your videos by the waterfront, where you are really taking that moment to lean in to
Mm-hmm.
being vulnerable. And I'm curious to know from you, because it certainly happens with me. But when you post things like that, when you get vulnerable, what
Mm-hmm.
is the response you get?
Okay. So this has been a lifelong journey of being vulnerable, especially, you know, whether you're sharing a video or posting something. I don't know if, well, you'll notice, because we've been connected with me before, that it's slowly becoming more vulnerable than before. And I
Mm-hmm.
had to check in with myself. Do I want to use LinkedIn or even Facebook as a way to express myself? And so, you know, I think I'm less worried now than before about how people are going to respond. And I'm actually surprised about the responses. Most of the responses have been like, thank you for having the courage to share your story. In the beginning, I can't even remember if I was even tracking it. Maybe there weren't as many likes or comments, but I've also learned to grow. I've grown to learn that if I'm going to share it, it's no expectations. This is, again, my obligation as a person to lead by example, to love by example, regardless of if people respond to it or not. It's my way of sharing my voice. I always know there's at least one person that's taking something away from it that can relate to my story, and that's all that
Right.
matters to me. Yeah.
Right. Yeah, it is quite profound. And I do find, and I'd like to just kind of put that out there for all the leaders, is that I too have gone on a really long, lifelong journey of leaning into vulnerability.
Mm-hmm.
And I was always open and like very vocal, and, you know, my everything's out in the open for me, but there are obviously moments in life where, you know, you have to be a little bit more vulnerable, and vulnerability feels like, you know, there's something going on for me that I'm actually unsure of or afraid of right now. And that kind of information is not information that I openly shared with a lot of people, or unless it was really close friends. But I know that having started to embrace that and having started to lead by example with that over the last, I would say, 5 to 10 years, I've noticed that people not only say thank you, but they also start to slowly reach out and say, hey, you know, I'm going through this, and this is what's happening for me. And I'm wondering if you have any resources, or I'm wondering if you can help in these ways. And it provides incredible intel for you as a leader to know, you know, what do my people need most? Because we can ask the question, what do you need most? And we're going to get surface level answers, especially in the workplace. You know, what do I need most? Well, I need, you know, a better desk. I need, you know, a quiet environment. I need to be able to make autonomous decisions, whatever, right? That's all surface level stuff. But what we're talking about with this kind of concept of coming through with vulnerability is identifying what people need most, because I think that's where you become a truly people first organization. That's my perspective. Curious to know from you, what is your perspective on, you know, why we might benefit from asking those types of questions? Because I did see your share this morning and kind of reinforcing the fact that asking those types of questions about what people need most is important. But I'm curious to know from your perspective, why? What do we get from digging that deep?
You're gonna create that sense of belonging and inclusivity, that people feel heard and seen and cared for. If we don't ask, then we don't find out any information about the individual.
Right.
And what I love about what you shared earlier is that in the beginning it will come across as surface level, because that's how you're just building that relationship and that trust and that safety. So in the beginning, the person will say, oh yeah, I just need a computer. Yeah, thanks boss. All good. You then a next check-in, you're like, okay, so how's that desk, and or how's that whatever you needed, and they go, fine. Okay, anything else? And you just have to be consistent. And
Right.
remember, we have layers, and so the only way we're going to learn more about ourselves and that safety is just little by little we're kind of opening them up. And then pretty
Right.
soon, enough times you say, how are you feeling? Maybe by the fifth time they're going to go, well, I can't say it's my desk. I already said that before. I can't say it's this. I've already said everything is amazing in my office. I've talked about my
Right.
and my whole school. Okay, I'm going to have to talk about me now.
Yep.
Okay, how are you feeling? And I think for leaders is to be patient. It's not going to just the first time you ask them, is they're going to answer and be vulnerable, just like how you are. But you can lead by example, just saying, you know what? Well, if you're asking me how I'm feeling, I'm feeling tired. I'm feeling, you know, I don't feel like I have enough time in the day, and I'm so distracted. As much as this work from home seems, we've been doing it for 2 months. You, by saying that, will open them up, go, well, if that person's courageous enough to say, like, they're my leader and they don't, you know, they're struggling too, I think it's okay now for me to say that I'm tired as well. So
Right.
it's about like leading and being the first to show, and if you want them to be vulnerable, be vulnerable. If you want them to feel safe, create safety.
Right. So well said. And you and I probably know this really well because of our experiences in learning and development, because you set the tone 100%. If you're leading a group of people, you are setting the tone in that room. And I think it's just such a profound lesson when you experience it yourself by seeing, you know, how you set the tone and how that has a ripple effect where others carry on that tone. But you said something quite important, and that was by the fifth time, you might open somebody up finally, or you might get into that conversation. And so I'm curious from your HR perspective, because I definitely have a perspective of my own on this.
Yeah.
And when you think about kind of those one-on-ones that we highly encourage our leaders to have with people, and you think about the 12 months in the year,
Mm-hmm.
how many one-on-ones do you think a leader actually has in a year with a person?
Like on average, just in
Yeah.
general?
Yeah.
In the ideal world, I'm hoping at least every 2 weeks.
Right.
But in reality, I don't know. It's interesting. The question's interesting for me because I've talked to managers where they say, I check in with my person every day,
Right.
all the time. Like I walk into the office, I say hi to everyone. I say, how's it going? What's coming up? You know, they kind of do their little, you know, walk by management. What is it called?
Right.
Yes. And they're visible.
Drive-by management. Yeah.
Yeah. And they're visible, right? Then I do a survey on these people, one-on-one as well as in an engagement survey, and they say they don't feel supported and they don't feel connected to their manager. What is the gap? I don't understand. The person's asking and then the person doesn't feel it. And it's the quality of the connection that's missing.
Yeah.
So even if we say, hey, let's do more check-in meetings, like if you did once a month, but that once a month was so profound and and the person felt that you cared for, and the conversations were enriching, where there was clarity as to what you expected and the vision and all those things that, you know, that we want to create, amazing. But every person's different in the way that they also want to feel connected. Like I like to feel connected every day, weekly, you know, that if I had a manager, because I'm expressive, I feed off the energy. Some people don't need as much connection. So you kind of have to figure out who your person is, what connection looks like to them, and how they like to feel supported. What is an ideal check-in meeting, and what could be, you know, created in that moment, and then kind of go from there. But I'm hoping that it's more about consistency. That's really, I want to highlight. If they're consistent in connecting, it's like dating. You eventually develop that comfort in that relationship and that trust.
Right. Yeah. And I would say I've seen the same. Like these walk-bys are great. They show that you're visible and you're there, but they're not creating connection. They might remind people that you are there, but they're not necessarily creating the kind of connection that we're talking about here today. And I know that you and I spoke about this last time, in terms of like the coaching experience, because I have found that it's a minimum of 5 sessions typically, unless the person is very open and honest and, you know, wears their heart on their sleeve on a regular basis and is very vulnerable and comfortable with it. It's usually that 5 to 6 session point where they start to kind of tip over to, I trust you or not. And I've been in organizations or supported leaders in organizations, you know, as a coach or a mentor to them, where the check-in is like quarterly. How do you even build connection if you're checking in quarterly? Like that conversation is very superficial. I would assume. I would love to get comments when this video actually gets released to hear if you can have a meaningful connection in a quarterly check-in. And I'm not talking about we have weekly one-on-ones plus a quarterly. I'm talking about organizations that only do it quarterly. Like we don't even have the regular one-on-ones weekly or bi-weekly or anything like that. What does a great one-on-one conversation look like, in your view, in order for our leaders to really start building this true connection and getting the vulnerability out on the table? What would that conversation look like, you think?
Well, I'm thinking about, like, you know, we're both coaches, and how do we, what is the first thing that we do when we sit down with our clients and kind of set the stage of our partnership? I feel there has to be something created at the beginning of every relationship. And if you haven't done this, it's okay. There's always another day where you can start this. But I would always start with creating that partnership agreement or trust agreement, or, you know, some coaches call it a designed alliance. And the reason why I think that's the first starting point, because it sets the foundation of what relationship or partnership you want to create with your team member. So if I were a new leader and I'm about to meet and I have like 5 direct reports, I would create or co-create a trust agreement with each of them. And in the trust agreement, we would define what trust looks like for both of us. What is a great partnership? What do I need to feel safe? How will I contribute to our trust? And then there's like a list of other questions that you would go through. And then in each of our check-in meetings, we would check in. Are we still living true to our trust agreement? How is the trust agreement showing up? Where is it not showing up? What do we need to add to it? What are others? So this is just a constant, and this is the same thing for like any kind of relationship. Like I always say, we should create trust agreements with our loved ones, right? With our kids, with our partners, because it's all, the foundation is about trust. So I think that once you have that foundation of trust and the trust agreement, and then you have your check-in meeting and you're checking in on that trust, then in the actual meeting, we've also designed what that meeting could look like. If you were talking to me and I was the one reporting to you, I would say, I love feedback. I'd love to know exactly how I'm doing. And the feedback, the reason why I want to do that, because I love to learn. And I know that I'm growing, and I do a lot of self-reflection. In addition, I'd love to also know what's going well, right? So I would love to have appreciation and recognition, because one of my appreciation languages is words of affirmation. So I like to hear the words. You can tell me how great I am a lot of times, and I would never get sick of it.
Right.
Because
Yeah.
I want to know how I'm doing. Again, going back to your article, there was something in my childhood where I never got any recognition. So I crave for that, but now it's also evolved because I also want to be a better person for the people that I'm serving. So I'm using that feedback and recognition so I could be a better leader and human being and team member for my team. But those are the key elements. It's like, what is trust, building the trust agreement, asking for feedback, the recognition, and also what does support look like for you? Not how can I support you, is what support looks like for you, because it might not be me as a leader supporting you, but maybe you need some support from someone else. And what does that look like for you?
Right. Very good point. And kind of reminds me of a new academy that just launched that's completely free right now for leaders. And it's called the Your Best Self Academy. It's from 15.5. I'm not sure if you're familiar
Oh,
with it.
cool. I'm going to write that down.
Yeah, they have, it looks like about 67 lessons in just one of their modules alone on really building that
Wow.
connection and that relationship and showing up as your best self in order to unlock and untap kind of the best self of the people around you. And I love that you said that, at the beginning of this call, and we've kind of had that theme going on. And the reality of all of this is, if I could, sum up what I think we're speaking about here, is our best self is really embracing all of who we are. And we
Yes.
cannot do that if we're showing up in the workplace with just a tiny piece of who we are. And I realize and I recognize that it's ridiculously uncomfortable for some people to like tip over that edge. But I also know from coaching the people that are led by those types of people that they don't feel connected with those leaders at all.
Mm-hmm.
Right. And I think that that's a really important thing to, end with, from my perspective anyways, is
Mm-hmm.
I think we need to get to a place, and we need to really create the space for that to be possible for anybody who is uncomfortable with self-love, with the idea of expanding love to others, and really identifying that, I love that you love your work, and I love that you love the work that we do collectively as a team, and I love that you love what we're here for, and all of that, like to expand that outwards. I think we've got a lot of work to do with a lot of people that just aren't there or aren't comfortable with it. And to me, that's so exciting. But I'd love to know from you, in closing out, because I do respect your time, what are the, like, what is the greatest thing that we can take away from this conversation, or that hasn't been said yet, that will allow us to look forward and say, this is something we just need to do now,
Mm-hmm.
to
Mm-hmm.
untap those hidden gold mines in ourselves, in others, our profits, whatever, because we do need to make profit in order to survive. And Lord knows that's going to look very different, when we
Yeah.
re-enter the workplace. But what
Yeah,
is
for
the one
sure.
thing that comes to mind for you?
Well, you said it already. This is the time where we need to embrace our whole selves, and not just for ourselves, for our, loving ourselves and embracing ourselves, but because that is what people want as well. We want more authentic leadership. We want more human beings showing up at work. We want to also feel more accepted. That's what diversity and inclusion has been talking about it
Right.
for years now, and now it's just coming to the forefront. We're starting to notice that people are, they have kids, they have dogs, they have all these other things. Zoom has actually now made us see into their homes who they really are, not just what they come after, when they get off the elevator and they're trying to be someone else. They can't do that anymore. It's more about bringing your whole self to work. But in order to do that, we need to create the space and lead by example. And so that's what I would say is continue to learn more about who you are, because that's the only way that you're going to show up more authentically. And then, be kind and self-compassionate as well. That, it's not an easy thing to do. I was going to also add, define what is love in the workplace for you, or even what love is, and how does it actually make you feel? And if you're still uncomfortable, what is the fear around it? What is it that we think it might be And is that really real, or is that something that we've now learned from a past history or program, and get curious about that and just continue to learn more about ourselves.
Right. I'm so enamored with that statement. I think digging into like the meaning and the inference, not just the meaning, like we can look at a definition of love online, but what does that infer to us? Like, did we grow up with this belief that loving somebody means that eventually we're going to be heartbroken? Did we grow up believing that loving somebody means that at some point they're going to leave us and, it's going to feel awful? Does it mean that loving the work that we do comes at a sacrifice of, those we do love, like our family? I know when I was running my own business, I was into like 80 hours a week sometimes, and totally immersed, absolutely in love with my work. And I think there's a part of me that sort of felt like I can't ever do that again because I'm going to lose my family if I do that again, right? And so I think you're bang on. If we can define kind of what love infers to us, not only as a self, as a human, as a whole self, but also what it infers to us at work.
Yes.
Then we can peel back the layers of that and start to really, again, I can't stand this word, but unpack it. It's the right word to use in this particular situation, to unpack it and create the space for even self-safety. We may not even have psychological safety in ourselves. Like, it's something that I haven't even thought about to this moment.
You had an aha moment as soon as you said it, right? That's going to be another article or another talk.
It might be, right? Because I know I had an aha moment with, a former boss of mine where I said, I have plenty of psychological safety with you from a work perspective. Like, I can tell you, or no, from a personal perspective, I can tell you anything that's going on in my life and you'll support me 100%, and I know it. But when it comes to work stuff, I do have moments where I'm walking on eggshells, and I wonder if we're doing that to ourselves as well.
And can I just add to that? It's the
100%.
It's the same thing about trust, right? When we feel like it's hard for us to trust others, we have to check in. What is trust? What's the issue of trust within us? Do we trust ourselves? What is self-trust?
Right.
And so it always comes back to ourselves. If we're it's so easy for us to say, okay, I want to be of service. I want to be an impact. I want to lead others. Got to start with leading yourself. Can't give effective feedback if you don't know what feedback is for you, or recognition, or trust, and all the things that we talked about.
Yeah, so wonderful. Great way to close off this session. And I really do hope we do have more of these because I think they're so valuable. I could literally listen to this over and over again and take notes that I will carry forward. And I think I'm going to do that. So you'll probably see an article in the future where I tag you and say, hey, guess what I did?
Yes.
So I thank you so much, Lorie, for all your wisdom, your brilliance, your love, your light, everything about you that makes your voice such a powerful one for where we are today. So I thank you for being here. And I'm so excited to release this, and I'm excited for your workplace culture report and for others to get access to that. So I promise I will link to those. Before we close off, are there any links that you want to share, any places you want to send people that we should be closing off with and adding to the site?
Yeah, in addition to our website, if you follow me on LinkedIn or connect with me, I will share the link, which is a landing page where you'll be able to download the report, and that will go out on Monday to our community as well as on social media. So if you're already connected with me, you'll just kind of see the link and you'll just kind of go there and get the report.
Awesome. Thank you so much.
Thanks
I hope you have
again.
a wonderful rest of your weekend.
Thank you.
Take care.
You too.
Oops. Okay.